How do folks? David here, and this video is primarily aimed at, well, new DMs or DMs who are struggling. I have realised that I've had this channel for a number of years now, and one of the things that I have completely failed to do is address dungeon mastering, actually running games. I've been doing it for many years. I have played under some absolutely brilliant DMs, and all of us old timers have maybe a couple of nuggets that some of you, perhaps less seasoned DMs, could find a little bit useful. So what I have had to do is go to the internet and essentially ask it, what are the top 10 pitfalls, hurdles that are encountered by new or inexperienced DMs? Now, the caveat obviously is that the answer that came back was AI generated. It may not necessarily be applicable to you, and I will be perfectly honest, some of the answers were not necessarily applicable when I first started DMing, but that was a very different time. However, I will go down through the list that I was given. This is going to be a series of videos, so if you want to gain some insight from a more experienced DM, please do hit the subscribe button and get notifications, because I am going to be doing this on a reasonably regular basis. But without further ado, we will get on with the very first one. And the top problem apparently is over preparation and burnout that comes from it. For some reason, new DMs feel that they need to create a whole world or continent for their players to be in. They spend hours and hours preparing a particular module, and then when their players go slightly off course, which always happens, then frustration starts building in, because they're then having to go and re-prepare another complete section, and that is just massive amounts of work for something which is supposed to be enjoyable, not just for the players but for the DMs as well. Now, I am going to treat this as two separate things. The burnout is probably the most important one, because at the end of the day, you're talking about your guys' mental health. Nobody should feel frustrated in anything that they're doing, especially not in a hobby where it is supposed to be enjoyable. You're doing this as part of your free time. Life's hard enough without you getting grief over the hobby that you're trying to do to relax. I have personally suffered burnout myself. Not in terms of over preparation, and like I say, I'm not 100% certain why they have linked those two things together. Although it is entirely possible that some of you may have gone through this or may be feeling it currently. There was a point where we had been running our campaign for about a dozen years, and I had been DMing through the whole of that period. And it got to a stage where I just needed a break. Thankfully, in terms of that sort of large collapse for me, we had another player who was also a DM, and he just said, I'll step in, I'll run a campaign. Now, part of the reason why I had been constantly running the game was because that other player, the one stepping into the DM's role, had more in terms of family commitments than I did. And what we did find was that while, yes, he was perfectly capable of running a game, and I was really enjoying getting to play, it was absolutely brilliant. It was a tonic. One of the ways of combating burnout, there you go, actually play. Unfortunately, what it did mean was that on occasion we did have to cancel games because he had other family commitments. However, after being able to play for a little while, what we did find was that I was in a far better frame of mind, and there was no issue with me stepping into his shoes, carrying on his campaign, just with the odd encounter. If we were at a natural stopping point, possibly between adventures, I might run a whole module by myself. I believe the first time it happened, we were traveling between locations. So we had finished the session in one area, we were due to be going to a town or something like that, and I just ran a couple of wilderness encounters, told him what had happened. Not massive experience, more of a sort of side trek, if you like. And that was fine. There was no changes in his overarching campaign. It just was a session run by a different DM, and the other players got a game out of it, and that was all good. So, moral of the story, if you have more than one DM or more than one person willing to DM, then you can swap about. As it turns out now, we are in a situation where yes, again, that particular player is tied up an awful lot with family commitments, but we are actually swapping to a different game. We've got one of the other players has decided, yes, he would like to try his hand out at DMing, and that is why we've moved over to 5th edition for his game. So it's a completely different game system. And of course, if you are in a position whereby you can't naturally sort of hand over to somebody else, but everybody still wants a game and you're just not feeling up to it, then say, hey guys, let's get together. Can we play a board game this time? Back in the day when I was still in my late teens, Risk, the board game, having that amount of players, a big multiplayer game of Risk, was always a good fallback position. And in more modern times, unfortunately, the DM had to cancel at the very last minute. The guys had already turned up, and I grabbed Terminator Genesis out, and we had a war game. And they paired up, had a battle, I reffed. We still had time left over. They swapped sides and used each other's forces to see whether or not they could get a different outcome, or who was the better at commanding a particular force. So there are certainly ways and means of combating burnout. There's a few ideas, but definitely what I would say is take time out for yourself to be able to play as well as DM. It's not all on you. You're allowed to have enjoyment, and if you're finding DMing stressful, then take a break from it. I will touch on that internet response where it attempts to put the burnout and over preparation together, and the frustration that comes from having parties veer off from your pre-prepared content. Yes, it is frustrating. Yes, there are tools to get around it. However, that theme comes up a little bit further down the list, and I will tackle that in a separate video when we get to that one. Now, with regards to over preparation, yes, I have been guilty of this. I feel that this one is possibly a little bit more of a modern issue, and it has been brought on by YouTubers and other creators that have these massive productions, and everyone's dressed in costume, and they've got full movie sets, props up the wazoo, and at the end of the day, those guys do this kind of thing for a living. They get paid very well for it with your subscriptions, etc. And that is not something that is realistically a good role model for your game, because at the end of the day, you are sitting around a table with your mates. Some players are a little bit more fortunate. Andy, I was very surprised when he had a full game room, and oh my god, with all these games around the wall and trays of miniatures and things like that, and it was heaven for a late teenager. I am fortunate enough that my gaming area and crafting area and modelling is the size, well, basically of a full bedsit apartment. It is half of an outbuilding on the property. Not everybody is like that, and my game area is certainly not a movie set. Please do not equate what you see on the internet as being the norm. The norm for you is you guys sitting around the dining room table, possibly using your phones as play aids. You've got the books there. Yes, you've maybe painted some miniatures. You've photocopied some floor tiles. It's all good. In fact, to be perfectly honest, even the floor tiles and miniatures for our first games weren't present. It was simply the dice, your character sheet, and the DM behind their screen telling you what was happening. Are player props that you can hand out nice to have? Yeah, they are. They do add a little bit of zing to any session, but only do it if that is the kind of thing that you're into. Yeah, I'm into cosplaying, I'm into modelling, and if there's an enemy wizard, yes, I will pull out the wand. But it's not necessary. Now, with regard to over preparation, I cannot stress this strongly enough. Don't do it. Your target audience is your players. Do your players really need to know that there is a cobbler in a shop 3 continents over. No, they don't. They are concerned with the here and now and what you are presenting them with. Now, as a prime example, to show you exactly what I mean, I am going to draw on a very, very famous setting that you will all know about. Star Wars. Yes, this is the role-playing game. Yes, it is done within that setting. It's an absolutely brilliant game. You guys will all be familiar with Star Wars and just how massive that universe is. Let's face it, it's got over 10 movies. I've lost count of how many TV serial programs it spawned. Loads of different games. The role-playing game itself expands on it. It's massive. Now, to illustrate my point, what I am going to do is take you back into the mists of time when the first Star Wars movie, Star Wars A New Hope, first came out, and I was only yea little and looking up in wonder at the big silver screen. I, as a movie watcher back then, was taking the place of what is now your players. Going into the movie theatre, I knew nothing about it. I was presented with the information when it came up on screen. So it was set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And there were spaceships, and there was battles, and there were robots, and there was good guys, and there was bad guys. And that's essentially all that you needed to know to get into the rest of the movie. What else were we presented with? Well, in terms of locations, we were presented with a homestead out in the middle of the desert. Carrying on through the movie, we had desert wilderness and canyons. Out in the desert somewhere was a crazy old hermit who had his own little cave. There was a town on the desert, and it was a little bit on the rough and ready side, and there was a bar in there, and that's where the party first gets together. Can you see where we are already getting into D&D territory? The party meets in a pub. Yes, the bad guys are chasing them. They flee town. They get away and arrive at the Death Star. So there's another location. Now, in the movie, this is the first time you actually start seeing a map. So it's obviously big. Maps are involved. They get in, they rescue the princess, they get out again and have another small battle with TIE fighters, and then escape completely and take the princess home. And yes, there is another space battle on what appears to be sort of like a rainforest type planet with sort of Aztec style temples. That could have basically been anywhere, but it was a nice bit of flavour. So we've seen a couple of locations. We've seen the inside of spaceships, we've seen a desert planet and a few areas on there. We've seen the Death Star, and we've seen another place, the fourth moon of Yavin. And in that whole galaxy, that's all that was prepared. And some of it didn't realistically need to be prepared all that much in any case. You don't interact with the fourth moon of Yavin a huge amount. You don't interact a huge amount with the spaceships in the opening sequence. In fact, if you break it down and we set it in D&D terms, everything that happens before the cantina scene, where Luke, Ben and the droids meet up with Han Solo and Chewbacca, that is realistically all character backstory. That is the kind of thing that is particular to those characters and is something that you can draw upon. Okay, it's not something you need to prepare. The adventure in your terms starts to happen at the point where the party meets in the pub. And because of backstory, they are being chased and they manage to get away, and they arrive at their next destination, which is the one that needs maps, the one that actually does need some preparation. That's your dungeon, the Death Star. Little known fact, the movie was actually supposed to end just after the point where they escape the Death Star, have the fight with 4 TIE fighters, and that was it. That was supposed to be closing credits. You didn't get the big battle with the attack on the Death Star. That was added in later on, basically to round the movie out and pave the way for, more income, essentially. In terms of your D&D adventure, party meets in a pub, goes to a dungeon, goes in, does what they have to, comes out, gets away. That's it. That is the sum total of the preparation that you need to do. Get your party together, give them an adventure. Everything else can come from backstory, or it can be expanded on later. And in terms of Star Wars, yes, it was. Obviously, George Lucas did have an awful lot of ideas going on in his head, but they weren't produced, they weren't put into movies or TV programs or things like that until later down the track, and he did change his mind. He didn't do it all right at the very start. Keep it simple. That's how Star Wars started out. Even in terms of party members, when you break it down, it's not necessarily the way that you think of it. Yes, the droids are in there from the start and they are party members. They have their own problems due to their backstory of being droids, in that they come across a little bit of prejudice when they attempt to get into the cantina, and they are definitely treated as second-class citizens. But as part of their backstory, yes, they were in a fight that they did not take part on when it was up on the spaceship. Yes, they interacted with the princess. Yes, they are the ones carrying the adventure. They get down on a Tatooine, they get captured, they get sold off. That is where they first join up with Luke. R2 runs away, all three of them join up with Ben, and then they go to the cantina. Ben, I would classify as an NPC. He is the wise mentor, or the one that is organizing or realistically giving the adventure to the party. Luke is definitely a player character, Han is, Chewbacca is. Princess Leia is an NPC. There is not a huge amount that she actually does apart from get rescued and taken from one place to another, and then ends the movie handing out medals. She doesn't do a huge amount in terms of actual interaction with the opposition. She spends an awful lot of the movie essentially as cargo. Yes, she does interact with the players, but it's the odd little DM hint that gets them out of trouble and keeps the adventure moving. Some of you may disagree with that take on it, and there is certainly a case to be had that Obi-Wan Kenobi is a party member as well. However, if there is one thing that Obi-Wan shows us, it is a very bad idea to split the party, because he gets isolated and ends up disappearing and coming back as a Force ghost. One other piece of advice that, since I've got it out, I will give you, that comes from the DM section of this. Only prepare what looks good on film. That is the interesting stuff. Yes, there is a point in the movie where Luke, Ben and the droids have found out that things have gone seriously pear-shaped back at the farm, and there is nothing there left for Luke. So yes, he is perfectly free to go off on adventures with Obi-Wan, and they go across the desert and end up at Mos Eisley. You don't actually see that journey. No idea how long it takes. Nothing happened on the way. It's just dead space. So don't game it. They go from one place, they arrive at the other. In Star Wars terms, the DM is actually supposed to go, okay, and cutscene, and open on the outskirts of Mos Eisley. The way you guys handle it is entirely up to you, whether or not it is, okay, you leave town and it takes you 3 days to get to the castle, whichever way you want to do it. Don't roleplay boredom, and boring stuff doesn't need to be prepared. Anyway, hopefully there is something in those ramblings that you can take out of it, which will give you a little bit of a hand, especially if you're finding yourself floundering as a first time or very novice DM. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below. It's entirely possible that one of the pain points that you're having is going to be in one of the upcoming videos, and I will let you know if that is the case. Otherwise, take a break from your preparation. Don't get burned out. Go do something that is enjoyable. Have yourselves a good time. I will see you in the next video. Toodle pip for now.